So we have a special treat for you this morning. Reverend Paul Hasselbeck was ordained in 1996, and he is Unity's leading metaphysics authority. And he has had a major role in bringing Unity metaphysics into the 21st century. He served as Dean of Spiritual Education and Enrichment from 2004 to 2014 at Unity, and he currently serves as an adjunct faculty for Unity Worldwide Spiritual Institute. He's a national speaker, workshop leader, teacher, and metaphysical coach. He is the author of several books, including Point of Power, Practical Metaphysics, Heart-Centered Metaphysics, and Power Up. So the 12 Power song was for you today, Paul. He's teaching 2 classes this week for our SEE, our Spiritual Enrichment and Education Program, and you can get more information about that in the lobby and sign up. So join me in welcoming Reverend Paul Hasselbeck.
Woo! Good morning. So, join me in knowing this affirmation. It's another beautiful day in my consciousness. Let's say that together. It's another beautiful day in my consciousness. One more time. It's another beautiful day in my consciousness. And I'm feeling with great ease to be up here today, because when the music is that good, when the music is that good, yeah. If you don't like what I'm saying or I fall on my face, you're going to remember their music, right? Yeah, so I'm good to go here. And I have Paul in the booth. Paul, thank you for helping me with advancing the slides. Yep. And you all know the Apostle Paul, right? Well, now you're going to get to know the faux pas. Okay? Okay, are we ready? Are we ready to romp? Come on, are we ready to romp? Yeah, so if you're going to get in the pool, if you're going to take a deep dive, you might as well get wet, so we're going to go in the deep end of the metaphysical pool. Are you ready for that? Okay, here we go. Use the truth you know. 5th principle, right? 5th principle, use the truth you know. Now, as I was going through Unity and studying, that word truth wasn't defined very well. And so I'm here today to help you define that. Because how can you use a truth you don't know very well, right? Next slide. And before I really get going, people often ask for my slides after the service, so I make that a service to you. You go to my book table, you can sign up, and I'll send you the slides. So you can take notes, but you can get them also. So here we go. Next slide. So first things first, I want you to put this in a context of an understanding that our founders, Myrtle and Charles Fillmore, had about what God is, and it happens to be a definition of God I work with all the time. Next slide. So, Charles said, define mind in the revealing word as, by the term mind we mean God, the universal principle which includes all principles. The universal principle. Next slide. And this is from Myrtle. We are studying spiritual science to get a broader conception of God, rather than holding to the view that he is a personal being with parts like a man. And I think she winked when she wrote that. A being subject to change and capable of varying moods. God is it. Neither male nor female, but principle. Yeah. So in this context, we're going to be talking about principle, and we're going to be talking about law. Next slide. So we live in a changing realm, right? And who knows it better than this congregation? You are in the midst of huge change, right? And in fact, I think one of the great synonyms we could have for unity would be change, because unity is all about principles and laws and how we can handle change. In a sense, as we live in this relative realm, we can't escape change. So we might as well learn how to use that change as a way to bring about good. Are you game for that? Okay. So in this material, physical, changing world, we have matter, things, events, space, time, and measurable. And what's really interesting is underlying all of this change is something that doesn't change. Constants and the laws of science. Next slide. And so this wonderful man, Lothar Schaefer, wrote a book called Infinite Potential. Here's what he said. Everything in the physical universe is based on non-empirical forms that are thought-like, existing in something that is mind-like. What? This is a quantum chemist who's defining it this way. So non-empirical forms are forms that you cannot measure or taste or feel. So these non-empirical forms are thought-like, existing in something that is mind-like. And I'm hoping this sounds a little familiar to you. Next slide. And so there's another aspect of the changing realm, our mind or consciousness. Our minds can change, right? And that's a very good thing. In fact, when we remain rigid and don't change, that's when we get in trouble with how we live with life. And, interesting enough, underlying the changing mind are constants and laws of mind. And in fact, these constants and laws of mind are really what Charles and Myrtle called spiritual principles and laws. Often when we think of spiritual, we spin off into divine essence and spirit and totally forget that this mind that we have operates according to constants and laws. Next slide. So principle or law, which? Now, this was an interesting journey. So the reason why I talk about this a lot now is, one, I'm writing a couple books about principle and law, and two, as I taught students over the decade that I was dean at Unity Village, people would ask me, Paul, is there a list of the laws? Paul, is there a list of the principles? And there really wasn't. And it was kind of ironic. We talk about this truth, but no one had really invested any time to delineate those. So I have a book coming out called Use the Truth You Know, The Principles and Premises. And what was really interesting as I did this research, Charles and Myrtle used the terms principle and law as separate things and sometimes as synonyms. So it made it very confusing to really understand what they were saying. And so I had to take this deep dive, and I actually looked at every reference to the word principle in every published Unity book and did the same with law. Next slide. But wait, there's more. So as I looked at these principles and laws, I found the next slide, that there are really principles, premises, laws, and rules. So premise would be something like, there's only one power and one presence in the universe, God the good. That's a premise. Yes? Okay? A principle would be something very simple and discrete, a constant, like each of the 12 powers could be also called 12 principles, and we're going to get into that. And then there's laws, there's immutable laws, laws that we must follow, laws that are always in play, much like the laws of gravity and the laws of electricity. There are laws of mind like that. And there are other laws that Myrtle and Charles talked about, which are more like rules. Like the laws of the road would be an example in our relative world. So a rule is something that's a good idea, but you don't have to follow it. So if there's a speed limit, there's a traffic law that it's 35 miles per hour out here, you have a choice whether you do it or not, right? And if you're like me, I never do it. It's always 5 miles per hour faster. Do you do that? Especially on the highway, right? So a rule you don't have to follow, you don't have to do it, a law you must follow. Are you with me? Raise a hand. Yeah. Because this is really important, because we talk as if the law of tithing is an immutable law that we must follow, but really, it's a really good rule, because I can choose to tithe or not, can't we? And it's an excellent rule that tells us how to use a couple principles that would be benevolence and generosity. So we're going to focus down now on principles and laws. Next slide. So we talk about 5 basic principles. Thank you for the song. Thank you for both songs. It actually sets this up really well. This is the way I've summarized them. God is absolute good, everywhere present. Our very essence is of God. And the importance of the activity of our thinking, and then prayer, we can put meditation there, and live the truth we know. Next slide. So, principle 5, knowing and understanding the laws of life are also called truth, are not enough. A person must also live the truth that he or she knows. Next slide. So truth, which is principle and law, abides in fullness at the very core of people's beingness. Did you know, I bet you did, that all these principles and laws are everywhere present, which means they're at the very core of your beingness. You're not separate from them. If you don't know what they are, you're using them unconsciously. Sometimes getting good results, sometimes not so good. And then Charles goes on to say, as awareness expands, people touch the everlasting truth, principle, and law. What seems new is but the growing awareness of that which has always been. Are you growing in the awareness of that which has always been? Yes? No? That's why you're here, right? To learn and grow in the awareness of your innate divinity. Next slide. So when we talk about truth, we're talking about divine or spiritual principle. A principle is a universal or spiritual fact or constant, and then divine or spiritual law describes how mind works. They are laws of mind or consciousness. And we don't have a choice. We have to use these laws. You're always using these laws. The only choice we have is the consciousness you bring to these laws. And if you have a low consciousness, you're using the laws at that level. If you have a high consciousness, you're using it at a higher level. Next slide. So principles are spiritual facts or constants. They're unchangeable, have no physical existence, timeless, and unlimited. Next slide. So here's a bunch of principles I've written about. The 12 powers. You guys know about the 12 powers. Do you know that they're innately in you? Yes or no? Yes. Yeah, they are there. You're using them all the time. And then there's benevolence. This is an interesting one. We talk about God is good, don't we? It's in the first principle. But in the context of what Myrtle and Charles wrote about, they were not saying God is good like a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout. They were saying God is the good. And in the revealing word, Charles defined that as the principle of benevolence. Do you know you have the principle of benevolence at the core of your being? Yes. Who said yes? Yeah, yes. At the very core of your beingness is benevolence. There's generosity, yes. Health, joy, wholeness, abundance, omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience, oneness, substance, justice, purity. Those are just some of them. You know, if you're in that moment and you don't know what to do, you can call on any of those at a higher state so you know what to do. Next slide. And so now let's look at law. So divine or spiritual law describes how mind works. They are the laws of capital M mind, little m mind, or consciousness. And Charles said, God as law is principle in action. So what Charles is saying there is every law uses principle. So law and principle work together. Next. So they too are unchangeable. They have no physical existence. They're timeless, they're unlimited, and they're always in play. Next slide. So let's look at some. Cause and effect. You guys heard about cause and effect, yes? Probably in your science classes. Okay, there's the law of divine order, law of mind action, law of expression. Let's look at those. Next slide. So what's really interesting about cause and effect, In the outer world, we think there's cause and then effect sometime later, right? But in mind, cause and effect always occur together. You can't separate them. If you have a current effect, there must be a current cause, and vice versa. So if you're feeling sad, if you're having that effect, there is a cause in that moment. Charles said this, in spirit, cause and effect are one. They appear as one. In mind, all things reach fruition the very instant they are conceived. Do you get the importance of that? Is that the instant you have that thought feeling within you, you have conceived of that thing in mind. There isn't a delay. There's no waiting for in mind. Next. So then there's a law of divine order. This one messes with people's minds sometimes, because sometimes it's commonly understood that divine order means God said it'll be this way. God's making it up this way. Tough luck, buddy, this isn't divine order, sort of. However, Charles talked about divine order in a very specific way in the 12 Powers book. And this is what he said. People can never exercise dominion until they know who and what they are. And knowing brings forth that knowledge into the external by exercising it in divine order, which is mind, idea, and manifestation. Now notice, exercise dominion. Dominion's one of our powers. We call it the power of power. You have absolute dominion over your own consciousness. No one, no thing has power over your mind. You could say you are the one God of your consciousness in a way. You're it. Tag, you're it. You have absolute dominion at the level of your mind. And then he says, until they know who and what they are. The who of you is your personality. The who of you is your body. The what of you is not a who. The what of you is this divine essence at your core. Knowing brings forth that knowledge into the external by expressing it in divine order, which is mind, idea, and manifestation. Now notice that mind idea in this equation is the cause, and manifestation is the effect. And in mind, they're simultaneously. And have you noticed that's the way your mind works? That in your mind you have an idea, and then you have maybe an expression of it, a feeling of it, and then you do a manifestation. It's never expression, mind, idea. This is the way it works. This is like a master law. It's the orderly way in which you think. It's the orderly way in which you express. Next slide. And then there's the law of mind action, which is just another way of saying cause and effect, or saying divine order. Thoughts held in mind produced after their kind. You've heard that, right? However, I think it's important in 2019 we amp it up a bit, because thoughts and feelings come as a unit. And we often ignore the feeling nature. And over the years, Unity forgot to bring forward something Charles said very important early on. He said, when I say thought, I mean thought and feeling. And it's that feeling side of the thought feeling that energizes everything, that energizes your mind. So now we can say thought feelings held in mind produce more thought feelings of the same kind in your mind. That's where the first effect is. Often we think thoughts, feelings held in mind produce after their kind in the outer realm, which that may eventually happen if we take action, but it's always causing an effect at the point of your consciousness and a point of your feeling nature, and the feeling you feel, that somatic something that goes on when you hold a thought with feeling. So it's really important we get this stuff clear, because we get into this magical thinking, if I hold this thought with feeling, something's going to happen out here, and we're forgetting what's happening in here. Let me ask you something. Complete this sentence. What I put out, give back. That's a common phrase we hear today, right? What I'm here to tell you is what you put out is already in. What you put out is already in. You don't have to wait for it to come back because it's already there. And once you put it out, you are growing that, whatever that thought feeling is in the moment you do it through the law of mind action. We're worried that if we put it out, it's going to come back a year later or 10 years later or maybe 5 minutes from now, when really the effect is already happening at the point of view. You put out crappy thoughts, you're growing a crappy experience, you're growing a crappy consciousness in your mind. That's how powerful you are at the point of view. You put out loving thoughts, you're growing loving thoughts in your mind. And you don't have to wait for them to come back. You realize they are what you are. Next slide. And then the law of expression. We must learn the law of expression from the abstract to the concrete, from the formless to the form. This is very interesting. When I started teaching this in my classes, I noticed a lot of Unity folks have an allergy to this concept. A mind allergy. Because we're talking so often and so importantly about how great we are and how we're infinite in potential, how we're free and unlimited. And in that hyper-focus, we forget that the way in which we manifest is by limiting the infinite. You can't demonstrate the infinite out here except in very specific ways, which means we have to limit our infinite potential in order to express. So let me give you just a mundane example. You didn't go to church in a very general way today, did you? If you had the general idea you were going to church, you would be still in bed today. But you had to limit that idea of going to church to a very specific church in order to get yourself here. Let me show you. Next slide. So mind idea starts abstract. We're looking in the middle, and then we limit it or define it or focus or form or refine that idea to have an inner experience, and then we might have an outer expression if we decide to take action, which is very specific and very concrete, yes? Your life doesn't happen in general ways. Your life happens in specific ways, and it happens by mind idea expression. It happens by cause and effect. It happens by thoughts, feelings held in mind produce more thoughts, feelings of the same kind in your mind. This is so important for us to get a grasp of our dominion. Everything that's happened in the development of your church, making this amazing new expression that is currently in mind, and it's in form as a diagram, yes? Yes, it's important for us to hold this whole thing at a high level in our consciousness, to be unified in that. That this process can't make you think or feel anything. You're choosing. I'm choosing. Any change can be used for good if you remember you are, in one way or another, one power and one presence. And you can get more specific by knowing which laws am I applying. Am I applying the law incorrectly? Am I using it from a negative place of consciousness? If I am, if you are, you can change it at any moment. And in a way, that's kind of a form of grace. And in your mind, don't you go from a general idea that's sort of formless, like a puff of smoke, and then you give it more form through the power of your imagination, and you form it? We go for the unlimited to the limit. Limitation is the way everything comes into existence in this realm. Next slide. So let's look at some application. So notice how your creative process moves from the abstract to the concrete. The thing is, as long as you're limiting an idea in your mind, trying to give it more and more form, as long as it's in your mind, you can change it like this. Your new building, while it's in diagrams and forms, it can be changed like that. You start putting in the foundation, it gets more and more locked in. So watch how you're limiting your ideas. So you limit them, you consciously limit them, using those 12 powers, using benevolence, using generosity. Figure out how you're doing that in mind, and before you make it so concrete that it's more difficult to change it. Once the building's built, you can always start over. Do I hear a hell no? Did you just faint? And notice how thought feelings you hold in mind grow. Do you notice that? And the sooner you notice that, if you're growing negative thinking, you can stop it. Stop that. And then when you're feeling those loving and kind thoughts, figure out how to grow those even bigger. Focus on benevolence or generosity for a week. Journal about your experience. Let me speak about generosity just for a moment. I want you to just touch the seat where you are right now. Okay? So who can remind me, how long has this building been in existence? 60? 60 years. Think about the number of people that have walked through those doors. Think about the number of people who came into this sanctuary, heard a new idea, applied it to his or her life, and changed. Now I want to put that in the context of generosity. That when it comes time in this service to give, yes, we're giving to keep this church going as it is, to pay salaries and to pay the electric bills and that. However, there's another very important thing we often overlook. Every gift you give to this church, you're paying it forward. You're paying it forward. You're making it possible for this particular church to operate so that the next new person that walks through these doors can have the exact same opportunity each of you had. To learn, to grow, to be the best you can be. And isn't that why we're here? We're here to be the very best we can be. Next slide. And so, use the truth you know. You now know some principles. You know now the laws of mind that you've been using for years. And to remind you, next slide. You can get my slides. I'm happy to mail them to you. God bless each of you.
Thank you, Paul.